With Hashem's help, we're going to learn today Yevamos Daf Yud. We left off yesterday the Yevamos Daf Yud all the way on top of the Amid, and let us make a quick review. Levi asked his teacher Rabbi HaKadosh, why didn't our Mishnah mention a 16th case? And as the Gemara explains, that Rabbi immediately understood that Levi was referring to Imai Anusas Aviv. The case was that, let's say Yaakov was Ma'anes, a woman, let's call her Miriam, and from that union was born Reuven. Then Yaakov went ahead and he married Leah, and with Leah he had Shimon. And Shimon went ahead and he married Miriam. He married the woman that his father was Ma'anes. And then Shimon dies without any children. So here it's going to come out that Miriam, the widow, who's also the mother of Reuven, is going to fall to Reuven for Yibum. And she's an erva, she's his mother. And the question is, why didn't the Mishnah mention another example where an erva can fall to Yibum, in which the halacha is that not only is there no chiyuv of Yibum between Reuven and his mother, nor chalitza, but likewise, even if Shimon had another co-wife, so this erva will be poited also the tzara. That was the question. And Rebbe expressed himself in a very sharp expression. And Rebbe tells the student Levi that that you don't have a moyach bekot kadai, that there's no brain in your mind. And why is that? And this is the way the Gemara said it before, because being Shimon's marriage to Miriam, who was the anusa of Shimon's father, is a machlekes between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that their marriage is asur mid'oraisa, it's a lav. True, it's not a lav that carries the penalty of kares, but it's a lav nonetheless. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, such a union should not happen. And the Mishnah is not speaking about scenarios that came about only because someone violated an Isur. And even though, according to the Chachamim, the marriage between Shimon and Anusas Aviv is 100% okay, but that's only according to the Chachamim. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's Asr. Ubeplukta loikamayri. And our Mishnah didn't want to give a case which depends on a machlekes Tanaim. That was the answer that Rebbe gave to Levi in a very strong way. So the Gemara in Daf Tesamad Beis was trying to prove that the Mishnah does give cases which depends on a plukta, and it gives it nevertheless. So what case are we referring to? The 14th case of the Mishnah was a case of a non-contemporary brother. That a non-contemporary brother, that if Reuven was married, and Reuven became a widow, Reuven passed away, and Reuven's wife is a widow, and then Reuven's brother is born, everyone holds that Reuven's brother is not allowed to marry ach eishes ach, because since when there was a passing, he was not alive, there was no mitzvah of yibum then, so the erva of eishes ach remains, and that was the 14th case of the Mishnah. So first of all, the Gemara clarified that there are two cases of a non-contemporary brother, and if Reuven, who passes away, has a brother who's alive than Shimon, who then marries Reuven's widow, let's say Leah, and then Levi is born. So when Levi was born into the world, Leah is no longer a widow. Leah now is Shimon's wife. According to Rabbi Shimon, if Shimon passes away childless, Levi has the mitzvah to marry Shimon's widow, even though she also was Reuven's widow, and he was not alive when Reuven was alive. Rabbi Shimon holds that that's mutter. So the Gemara clarified that being that Rabbi Shimon agrees in the first scenario, when Reuven dies,
he has the mitzvah, but we still say you don't do it because of...
No. He has the mitzvah and he does it. And he should do it. So it's not even an erva. Nevertheless, Rabbi Shimon is moida that if when Reuven dies, before Shimon married Leah, when Reuven's wife, widow, Leah, before she remarried, if then Leah is born, then everyone agrees that Leah will never be allowed to marry her, even if first Shimon married her, and then Shimon passed away, Leah can never marry her. And that will be the case of the Mishnah, that will be unanimous. countered the Gemara that that's not exactly correct, because we had the scenario that we
So the disagreement, just as far as Reb Shimon is concerned, is the case where the brother, where the wife, when he was born, the third brother, the wife
was already married.
The second brother.
Then he holds that he's allowed to marry her.
He says allowed to it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the Chacham would
Say that nevertheless, since he's since she's also the widow of Reuven and Leah is a non-contemporary brother, then the Isur remains. Okay. So now the Gemara went ahead and said that there was this whole build-up in the Mishnayos. You have a case of two brothers marrying two sisters, and there was a third brother, and then the Mishnah gave a case where there was actually a fourth brother. And the Mishnah begins teaching the din of the Isur Midrabanan on Eshe Zikku Kasai. And then the Mishnah gave a scenario where there were two brothers that married two sisters. Both brothers died. And these two sisters happen to be an erva on the two remaining brothers. But if there's a case where one sister is an erva only on one, and the other sister is an erva only on the other, which means that there will be no zika between one living brother and one of the two widows, so there isn't any more Eshes Ziku Kasai. There, everyone will hold that each brother will be mechuyev to do yibum or chalitza with the one to which is not an erva. Came along Rabbi Avraham, he said that bekulan, that in all of the 15 cases of the Mishnah, we can create a scenario where the two widows will be the same erva type, only for one of the brothers. And that was a complicated case. We only spoke through the case of Bitoi, and now we're going to speak to the case of the 14th case of a non-contemporary brother. So there has to be a scenario, according to Ubekulan, according to Rabbi Chia, where there can be a case where there are two brothers who are married to two sisters, and both brothers pass away. And now the widows will be falling into Yibum. However, one of the sisters will be ushered only on one of the brothers because of a non-contemporary brother, and the other sister will have that same prohibition only on the other brother. And the Gemara is going to show you right now that Abaya claimed that such a case is only possible only if a hold like Rab Shimon. We didn't explain it yet yesterday. And the final opinion was the opinion of Rab Safra holds that really when Abchia said Ubekulan, he meant Bekulan. Both the case of Bitoi, even though it can only come about through an Isur, but it can come about. And likewise, even though that the 14th case can only work out according to Rab Shimon, Rab Safra says that Rab Chia meant what he said. That all of the cases of the Mishnah can work out that it's Mutaris Lazu and Asuris Lazu. And now we're going to see that according to Rab Safra, according to Rab Chia, the Mishnah does go into a plukta. So now we didn't talk through the case yesterday. So let's just read Taf Yud Amud Aleph, V'simanech. What would be the case? Meis noilad v'yibim, meis noilad v'yibim. So now as we say in Yiddish, we have to hold cup, you have to hold your head. We have Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, four brothers. While these four brothers were all alive together, Reuven marries Rachel, and Shimon marries Leah. Okay, Levi and Yehuda now are single men. After Reuven marries Rachel and Shimon marries Leah, so now you have Mace. Who is Mace? Let's look inside. Reuven dies. What happens when Reuven dies? His wife, his widow Rachel, is falling to Yibum to the brothers. Who is living then? Well, you have a living brother, right? Shimon. Shimon cannot marry Rachel. Why not? Because Shimon married Leah, sister. But you have both Levi and Yehuda. Okay. Now, after Reuven died, now Noilad Yisachar is born. And Halkop, since Yisachar was born, when Rachel was still a widow, even Rab Shimon, who sometimes allows a non-contemporary brother to marry the widow of his non-contemporary brother, here he will be moed to the sages that since he was born when Rachel was not married yet to any of the other brothers, she's a widow of a non-contemporary brother. So now Yisachar L'Kula Alma will be asked eventually to ever get married to Rachel. Then the Yibim. Levi was Miyabim Rachel. Now, Mace, now Shimon dies. Shimon is married to Leah. Noilad Zvulun. And after Zvulun was born, V'yibim now goes along Yehuda, and Yehuda's Miyabim Leah. Now here's the key. Why is here the key? Because when Shimon and Zvulun, let's walk through the cases. So Yisachar, now Levi and Yehuda now die. So what do we have now? Now we have two sisters, Rachel and Leah. They were widowed twice. We have two brothers, Yisachar and Zvulun. Let's walk through all the cases. So Yisachar can marry Leah. Why can Yisachar marry Leah?
Because it's his brother's Yevamos. And he was alive only when she became what he called.
Because Yisachar was born before Shimon passed away. So Yisachar can't marry Leah. Can Yisachar marry Rachel? L'kuli almanat. Why L'kuli almanat? Even according to Rab Shimon, because since Yisachar was born before Levi did Yibum with Rachel, so everyone will agree that here there will be a case that let's go. That Yisachar can only marry Leah and cannot marry Rachel.
Right.
Now, let's go to the other case. What about Zvulun? Zvulun is usher to Leah, again, L'kula Alma, because Zvulun was born after Shimon passed away, before Leah married Yehuda. Even Rab Shimon will agree that Zvulun is usher to Leah. However, according and only according to Rab Shimon, Zvulun is allowed to marry Rachel. Why can Zvulun marry Rachel? True, Zvulun did not live at the same time as Reuven, non-contemporary brothers, but since before Zvulun was born, Levi already went ahead and he married Rachel. So according to Rab Shimon, he was a contemporary brother with Levi. He only knew Levi being married to Rachel. Now that Levi passed away, he has a mitzvah v'yibum with Rachel. So that's the way Rab Safra explained that when Abchia said Ubekulan, he meant Ubekulan. Even though Ubekulan can only work according to one opinion of Rabbi Shimon, and Rebbe is claiming Ubeplukta loy komaidi, and here you see Ubeplukta komaidi. Perfect question.
Just to summarize, this case, the six brothers of the what do you call it he was born after the
Eishes Achiv Shalei Hayeh Ba'olamai.
Right. So Eishes Achiv Shalei. So that case only works. Wait, in the case, the example of where there's two wives, and one's looked into one brother, one's looked to the other brother, only applies according to Reb Shimon.
Correct. So now, and nevertheless, it's mentioned. Why is it mentioned? Because Rab Chia says Ubekulan ani koyde behem hu asuras l'zem utaras l'zem. So the Gemara says Ella. The Gemara Bach takes out the word Ella. LeRebbi hani klali lesli. Who said Rebbe is a Tana? The Mishnah didn't say that all of the 15 cases of the Mishnah needs to work out in this very complicated case where there are two brothers married to two sisters, and on top of that, the two brothers pass away, and every one of the two sisters could be an erva to one and a non-erva to the other, and the same category of erva. Rab Chia said that. Rebbe never said that. Rebbe doesn't have to work out the Mishnah in the complicated case of Rab Chia, and therefore Rebbe stands with the idea that our Mishnah gives cases which do not enter a plukta. The question of Levi was, why didn't the Mishnah mention the case of Anusas Aviv? Imay Anusas Aviv is not a permissible scenario according to Rabbi Yehuda, or B'plukta Loy Komaydi. Comes along the Gemara and he says, Rav Ada Karchina said in front of Rav Kahana, in the name of Rava, I'll give you a better answer. La'olam really, Islay Rebbe Hani Klali. Rebbe agrees with what Rab Chia says, that Ubechulan Ani Koyrem Asuras Lazem Utaras Lazem. And what was your question? That means the Mishnah goes into a plukta. Yeah, the Mishnah can mention a case that would only work according to one Tana. But don't forget, if the Mishnah would mention the 16th case, the 16th case would also have to work out with this rule of Ubekulin ani koyre bohem hu asuras lezem utaras lezem. That means that we have to create a scenario right now where there's going to be two brothers and there's going to be two sisters, and one brother will be prohibited only on one of the sister because it's imay anusas miyaviv, and the other one will only have the isur on the other sister. That will not work out at all. Means even if you're going to hold our Mishnahs like the Chachamim, not like Rabbi Yehuda, Ubeplukta Komairi, but the Mishnah can only mention a case if it can also work out in the scenario of Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chia's scenario cannot be applied over here. This is what Rebbe was telling in Levi. Imay anusas aviv bechad mishkachas la, but betarte loika mishkachas la. See, Rabbi Chia was trying to tell us. Rabbi Chia is telling us that our Mishnah can be worked out with both of the two widows are two sisters, and it's a scenario where when they become widows, one is an erva under one category to only one brother, and the other widow has that same category of erva to only the other brother. Rabbi Chia is saying two things. This scenario we can work out in Ima and Nusas Aviv, but they can't be two sisters. And if you're going to give me a case where there are two sisters, you'll find a case where there are two sisters, but they won't be ushered only to one and permitted to the other. So, in other words, to have Rabbi Chia's case of having both two sisters, and each sister is only ushered on one of the brothers because of an erva, that cannot be worked out if the Mishnah would have mentioned the case of Imay Anusas Aviv. That's a fantastic answer. So exactly, since Rebbe holds like Rabbi Chia, that's why Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not mention the 16th case, and the Gemara talks it out.
We hold by no plukta.
Fakert. So now we're saying that maybe the Mishnah goes into a plukta. Rebbe does hold of a plukta. And the Mishnah mentions a case that only works out according to Rab Shimon. But it has to work out according to one Tana. Imay Anusas Aviv cannot work out according to no Tana. Says the Gemara, Yaakov beis achoyis anas. What would be the case? So Yaakov was ma'anas to women, right? And he was ma'anas to women. And these two women have to be sisters. So we can work out one of the two cases of Rabbi Chia, that they might end up being sisters. However, but for you having two sisters, and each one will be permitted to one and not to the other, that will not work out. If they are sisters, it cannot work out. So what will be the case of here? Now, if they are not sisters, then it could work out. Then anas ho asura beis nachriyas anas. If the father Yaakov was ma'anas two non-sisters, then it can work out that ho asura lazeh muteres lazeh mishkachas la. But again, achoisa sheyevimta le mishkachas la. But you cannot have a scenario where both of them worked out. And here you have in the illustration. And again, encouraging people who are learning through the web is to look at the diagram. It's a very simple scenario. All right, the examples that we have over here is that Yaakov was ma'anas both Chana, right, and Penina, and from every non-kosher relation, a son was born. Then the father married another woman, and he had Reuven and Shimon, and each one married the anusa of the other side. So now, right, this doesn't even work according to the Chachamim. Why not?
The one that says that you could
the Chachamim. No, 1 second. Rabbi Yehuda holds the Kedushin is chal regardless. But the Chachamim Rabbi Yehuda holds that a man should not be allowed to marry his father's anusa. Now, what do we have over here? We're going to have a case where there's an isser for a man to marry his mother's sister. A person not being allowed to marry his mother's sister is an isser according to everyone. So if these two widows are sisters, then the marriage would have been non-kosher, even according to the Chachamim, because he can't marry your mother's sister. So there's an isser erva on both. It's not that who's mutter to one will be usher to the other. If it's usher on one because why? What will be the case over here? It's going to be usher on one brother because it's his mother. So then this same woman is usher on his brother. Why is the same one usher on his brother? Because it's going to be his mother's sister.
Mother's sister. Whose mother's sister?
Give me the diagram over here. Let's talk this out. We have over here Yaakov was ma'anis Chana. Okay, and from this was born Levi. Yaakov was ma'anas Penina, and from this was born Yehuda. Now, Reuven can marry Chana, right, according to the Chachamim, because Chana is not his father's wife. Chana was just had a relation with his father. Reuven married Penina. Now, comes along Shimon married Penina. Reuven and Shimon both pass away. So now Reuven and Shimon have two brothers, Levi and Yehuda. So Levi is not allowed to marry Chana because Chana is his mother. Well, Levi cannot marry Penina because Penina is his mother's sister. Yehuda cannot marry Penina. Yehuda cannot marry Chana. In other words, we can't find a case, if they wouldn't be sisters, it would work out perfectly. You can find a case where Muteres Lezeh, Asuras Lezeh. But in the case that they're both sisters, it's impossible to have a case where one is mutter to one and asur on the other. And that's why the Mishnah didn't say it. I just want to point out that doesn't fit into the words of Rebbe. What did Rebbe tell Levi? The words that we had in the Gemara was, after he gave him Musar, that he tells him, Imay anusas aviv plukta. Beplukta de Rabbi Yehuda v'Rabbanan. Or beplukta loikomairi. Here, the Gemara is bringing another response that that's not what Rebbe really meant. Rebbe meant that the Mishnah could mention a plukta. And the 14th case is beplukta. It's just that it doesn't work out, a 14th case. In any event, that has to be worked out. Let's go to Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi Yomar lo elam leis leila Rebbe ani klolim. Even if Rebbe doesn't agree with Rab Chia, that we don't have to make every case of the Mishnah work with two brothers and two sisters, and even if Rebbe ubeplukta komairin, and even if Rebbe would not mind to mention a case that only works out according to one and not to another Tana, nevertheless, umay kimedumali she'ein loy ma'ich b'kakati dikamer lei. What did he mean? You Levi, you don't have a brain in your skull. Amalei my tama loy daik mas nissen. The Mishnah has to be Rabbi Yehuda, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, you do not have the 16th case. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda holds that a man can never marry a woman who his father had a relation with, even out of wedlock. How do we know the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, who's Asr Banusas Aviv? Because the Ktani, it says in the next Mishnah, there are 15 arayos mentioned in the first Mishnah, and then in the second Mishnah, the Mishnah mentions that there are 6 additional arayos that were not presented in the first case. So the Mishnah says, Sheish arayos chamuras me'elu, mipnei she'ein sheheim nesuyas la'achedim, because they are only allowed to marry other people. It means no marriage would have been kosher to begin with, and therefore it's sort of saying mutarais. For example, there can never be a case where Imai, or Eishas Aviv, his father's wife, or his father's sister. Now, the Gemara says, when we speak about 3 ervas that are completely asr, in other words, the Mishnah gave cases where the first marriage was kosher. Reuven married Shimon's daughter. Reuven is allowed to marry Shimon's daughter. The Kedushin is chal. If Reuven dies, only Shimon cannot marry his daughter. But the marriage of Reuven was kosher. The other 6 arayos are so prohibited that you'll never find a case that the first marriage was kosher. And there we mentioned the marriage of a mother. So if Reuven cannot marry his mother, Shimon cannot marry his mother, same mother. And none of them can marry their mothers. Now if we're speaking about father's wife, not mother, my imai. What's the case of mother? If it's speaking about any woman who married the father, that's the case of Eishas Aviv. It's not a separate case. Elolav, that the Chiddush of Imai is Anusas Aviv. And on this, the Mishnah writes, Viktani mipnei sheheim nesuyis la'achedim, that such women cannot marry any of the sons. They can only marry other people. La'achedim in la'achim loy. And man shamas lei de islei haisvara Rabbi Yehuda. In other words, the second Mishnah can only go according to Rabbi Yehuda, the Asar Ba'anusas Aviv, and that's why Rebbe in the first Mishnah couldn't mention the 16th case, because the Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. A quick recap, going back into it. The case that we are suggesting that should be mentioned in the Mishnah is the following scenario. Reuven had a relation with a woman out of wedlock, which is not kosher. The wordings in the Gemara will be that Reuven raped a woman. Let's call her Miriam. From that was born, Yaakov. Yaakov raped a woman, and the son is called Reuven. Then Yaakov marries Leah, and they have a child called Shimon. The Chachamim hold that Shimon is allowed to marry Miriam. Says, even though a man can never marry his father's wife, even if it's not his mother, the Chachamim hold that since that Miriam never had a kosher relation with Yaakov, Shimon can marry Miriam. So Shimon marries Miriam.
Is that his grandmother?
No, that's his father's Anusa. Nothing. He's no relation to Shimon.
Okay.
Shimon dies childless. So now there's going to be a scenario that Reuven, who's the brother of Shimon, who has normally a mitzvah to marry his brother's widow is his mother. So the Gemara is saying that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Shimon was not allowed to marry Miriam, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Even though they were never married, his father and Miriam were never married. Nevertheless, since this woman had a relation with his father, he's not allowed to marry her. True, there's no kares. If he marries her, the kedushin is chal, but it's a lav.
Even according to Rabbi Akiva?
Not according to Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, it's not even chal. And that's why it's not mentioned in the Mishnah. Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. Amalei Ravin le Ravashi, le Rabbi Yehuda nami mishkachas la. Even if our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda, being that according to Rabbi Yehuda, if Shimon would have married Miriam, the kedushin is chal, the I avad, if he violated the prohibition and married her, then there could be a scenario where you have the 16th case that Reuven can find himself connected to his own mother. So why didn't the Mishnah mention it? Even if it's an Aveda, but it's possible. Answers the Gemara, the I, that if someone violated, we don't speak about such cases. Like Tani, we don't give a case of the I. All of the other 15 cases were cases where the original brother married a woman, beheter. Okay. I'll find you another scenario where a person might have this zika to his own mother without any permanent violation. Permanent violation means that according to Rabbi Yehuda, Shimon was not allowed to marry Miriam. And if he married Miriam, he's violating he's constantly in violation of the law because he's married to Miriam. Let me find you a case where there wasn't a marriage. Number one. Number two, let me find you a case where the violation is even once removed. It's less connected to the case of Yibum. What will be the case? Let's go like this. Yaakov, these are crazy scenarios, but just hypothetically. Yaakov has a son, Reuven. Okay? And Reuven is married.
Yaakov
Has a son, Reuven. And Reuven is married, and Yaakov goes, God forbid, and he rapes his daughter-in-law. He's ma'anas, his daughter-in-law. And from that is born Shimon. Here there's no marriage. There was one act that was usher. Shimon and Reuven are brothers. They're paternal brothers.
Right.
Well, it's sad. And Shimon now, Reuven dies childless. Think about it. And now his widow, which is the mother of Shimon, falls to Shimon. B'yibum, imay anusas aviv, and here there is no violation like in the case that we were giving until now, where Shimon, we said, married Miriam, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, you're not allowed to marry her. First, it wasn't a marriage; there was a one-time act. So again, there's a possibility for someone.
Reuben was married beheter.
And Reuben was a Yisrael, so the fact that his wife was raped doesn't make their marriage usher, having a kosher marriage.
They continue their marriage even?
Yes, they do, absolutely. Yeah, the only time that breaks the marriage if the husband is a kohen. So Yaakov, Anas Kalasa, Yaakov was Ma'anas, his daughter-in-law, his son Reuven's wife, and from this was born a son, let's call him Shimon, and now Reuven dies, Bilay Banim, Nafla Kame Berei. And why didn't the Mishnah say a 16th case? Umigu di'i asira. Mishnah could have said, now that Shimon cannot marry his mother, right? So now Shimon is also exempt from marrying any other of his brother's co-wives. The Mishnah should have said it. So that's an asira. Answers the Gemara. Here again, the concept is the same. The Mishnah doesn't want to mention a case that came about through any prohibition. Be'achvasa dehetera, brotherhood that is permissible. A case where two brothers are kosher brothers, so to say, komaidi. Those will be the cases mentioned in the Mishnah. But be'achvasa de'asira, you hear the case, a crazy Shimon and Reuven are brothers, that's not a kosher brother. Like komaidi. So this is all answering why Rabbeinu HaKadosh did not incorporate in our Mishnah the 16th case of Imay Anusas Aviv. Concludes the Gemara that Va'af al Pikain, even though Rebbe not only responded to Levi, but Rebbe was, it sounds like Rebbe was upset at Levi, like, why did you even think of that question? Levi felt that being that this case is possible, not only should it be mentioned, he mentioned it. And just a quick history. Rabbeinu HaKadosh was the one that compiled the Mishnayos. However, Rebbe did it on the highest level of Ruach HaKodesh, and everything in the Mishnah is precise, and Mishnah is Oisius Neshama, and all of the power that's in the Mishnayos. But there are many other works of Tanoim, we call them Medrash, the Kabbalah, Zohar, then we have Tosefta, Safra, Sefri, that were written by Rebbe's contemporaries. Some of them were written by Rebbe's students. So there's a group, there's a work of teachings, Torah Shabbat Peh, that's called Tosefta, in addition to the Mishnah. Most of them were compiled by two of Rebbe's students, Rabbi Chia and Rabbi Oishia. We learned that together. However, like we said yesterday, Levi was also a student of Rebbe. Levi also compiled Braisas, Toseftas. And when Levi was compiling additional opinions of Tanoim, Torah Shabbat Peh, on the dinim of Yevamos, he added this 16th case. Let's read it inside. Afal Pikain, he says that the Batka, Levi b'Masnisan, that Levi added this 16th case in his Mishnah. The Tani Levi learned that Imai, that even one's mother, there can be a scenario where one's mother will exempt, and sometimes she won't. Why will there be a times that one's mother will not exempt him? Because again, we're trying to figure out a scenario where the original marriage was kosher. If the original marriage was not kosher, like if Reuven and Shimon, who are two brothers, if one of them marries their joint mother, the first kedushin is not chal. And therefore, when he dies, she's not a widow from his brother. So therefore, if he had another co-wife, then Shimon has to marry the co-wife in Yibum. In other words, it's pa'amim einoi peteres sorosa ketzad choyse imenusoy aviv. If his mother was married to his father, and v'nosas le'echav mi aviv, and one of the brothers married this woman, and that marriage is not only not kosher, but being that he is marrying his father's wife or his mother, regardless, he is violating a prohibition on which there is kares, which means the kedushin is not even chal, there's no kedushin, so that marriage is nothing. So if there was a co-wife, halachically that's the only wife. So therefore, umeis, and now the brother who did this violation, but that was married to another woman dies, that will be the case, zuhi imay she'ena petar sarasa. The surviving brother, or one of the brothers, have to do yibum or chalitza with the co-wife. She's a co-wife to an erva? No, there was no marriage. Turning the page. But haisa imay anusas aviv. This is Levi. But if we're going to have a case, or one of the cases that we mentioned before, where it's possible that one brother would be allowed, like we were giving the case that Reuven married Miriam, according to the Chachamim, it's mutter. And even according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's allowed, but the Kedushin was chal. And now, v'nisas le'echav mi aviv, u'meis, zuhi she'imai, that will be a case that imai poiteres sarasam. Being that Shimon cannot marry his mother, and therefore if the brother was married to another co-wife, he's exempt both from Yibum and from Chalitza on the second co-wife. And and Levi wrote, even though that my teacher Rabbeinu HaKadosh wrote 15, I found the 16th. So because Levi didn't back down, Levi had the 16th case. Now we're moving on to a new case. Okay, this is fantastic.
Not only he adds one, but he agrees with him also. There's no plukta between them.
What do you mean he agrees with him?
No, he accepts his musar, but still adds another
Correct, because there is such a case. So now Reish Lakish tells Rabbi Yechanan the following. Levi, the Amar, according to Levi, who counted 16 cases, meaning Di'i Namiktani, he wrote in a 16th case, even though the 16th case can only exist if some violation was done, but we don't care, it's possible that, God forbid, the violation was done and we have the 16th case. So now Reish Lakish is asking Rabbi Yochanan, why don't we have a 17th case? Li Tani, why don't they give the following scenario? Ha'choylitz li eventoi. Okay, let's go back to the two brothers, Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is married to, let's give her a name, Miriam. And Reuven passes away childless. What does Shimon have to do now? Shimon has a mitzvah of either being miyabeim Miriam or to do chalitza to Miriam. Even though there's normally a prohibition that a man is not allowed to marry his brother's wife, it's one of the erves. In this case, it's a mitzvah to do yibum or you have to do chalitza. Now, what were to happen if Reuven doesn't, if Shimon, the living brother, doesn't marry her, he does chalitza to her? What now? Is he allowed to marry her after he does chalitza? Another question. If he did chalitza, let's say there were more than two brothers. There was Reuven, who died, and there's Shimon and Levi, and Yehuda, and we don't care how many brothers. Only one of them does yibum or chalitza with one of the wives. Once that is done, then what? Here's the two options. Either all of the wives now go back to their original prohibition as you cannot marry your brother's wife. That's a violation of prohibition that carries the penalty of kares. Or not. What's the other?
Other wives, like other tzara?
Even if there's another tzara. Correct. Or what? It says in the Torah, these are the words of the Chumash, that if the chalitza ceremony is done, so there's a whole thing that the shoe is taken off, and she spits in front of the surviving brother, and she tells him, this is what is done, asher lo yivne es beis achiv, to the person who doesn't build his brother's house. Now, for people who know Lashon Kodesh properly, whenever there's a word that starts with a yud, the yud also gives that word a future understanding, a future sense. Yibane. This is what's done to the brother who will not build. Who will not build means, these are the words of the Chachamim, Kiven Shalei Bana Shuv Lo Yivna, that if you didn't do Yibum, you did Chalitza, you're not allowed to marry her again. Not allowed to marry her again is a don't do something, a lav. But this lav is not a lav that has kares. And as we'll see soon, everyone agrees that the brother who did Chalitza with whichever widow, either only one widow or with one of the widows, if he marries her again, he's only violating a lav she'ein by kares. And therefore, if he marries her, the lav is lo yivnes beis achiv. That's the name of the lav. And therefore, let's take Rabbi Akiva out of the picture. The marriage is chal. Marriage is a marriage. Question is, what about the other brothers? So let's read it inside. If Levi is already giving cases where a violation happened, why don't we give a 17th case? Litani, let him learn that if Reuven died and he left a widow, and Shimon goes ahead and he made chalitza to the widow, and then he violated the lav of Chazav V'Kitcha. The Chazav V'Kitcha, again, it's a lav, but there is no kares. So therefore, the marriage is chal. And now Shimon dies. So now the question is, Umeiz b'lo banim. And now she dies, Shimon dies. The question, what does Levi do now? The migu di ihi asura. She is not allowed to marry Levi according to Reish Lakish, because according to Reish Lakish, the erva, the lav of kares of Eishes Ach goes to the other brothers. According to Reish Lakish, who only has a lav she'ein by kares? Only the one that did the chalitza, but the original prohibition stays for everyone else. So now that Shimon dies, Levi cannot marry her. Why not? Because she is Eishes Ach. Eishes Ach of whom? Of Reuven. The Isser of Eishes Ach did not go away because chalitza was done to her. And why didn't the Mishnah mention this case? That's a question. How does that work out? We'll get to that later. But one of the brothers will represent everyone, and he's going to pick one of the two wives, or one of the three wives, however many wives the first brother had, and Yibum or Chalitza is done by one brother to one of the wives, period. We'll see that later.
Yeah, but if there's two brothers and two wives, you don't say, hey, one does Yibum and the other one does Yibum.
God forbid. No. It's Yibum or Chalitza. It's only one act, either of Yibum or of Chalitza to one of the wives. So why wasn't this mentioned? So comes along Rabbi Yechanan, as we'll see in a moment, Rabbi Yechanan disagrees with the whole question. Because Rabbi Yechanan is going to hold that just like Shimon, who did Chalitza, if he marries her, the marriage is going to be a marriage, he holds that same is true to the other brothers as well. So she's not an erva with a lav, she yesh boikaras. Now don't forget that in such a scenario, according to Rabbi Yechanan, right, Reuven dies. Shimon did Chalitza to Miriam. Shimon did Chalitza. Then Shimon married her. Shimon only violated the lav. The marriage is a marriage. According to Rabbi Yechanan, if Shimon dies, if Levi marries Miriam, he's also only violating a lav. Therefore, the chiyuv of Yibum exists. True that Yibum should not be done because you can't violate Hashem's rule, but Chalitza needs to be done. So that's why the Mishnah didn't mention it. But Rabbi Yechanan doesn't even respond that. Rabbi Yechanan is telling Reish Lakish, even if you're right, even if all of the other brothers are asur on the widow, with a lav sheyesh beikares, why doesn't the Mishnah mention it? Amalei lefi she'eina b'tzara tzara. The Mishnah wanted to tell you a din that any time there is a isur erva which exempts yibum chalitza on her and on the co-wife, if this co-wife married another brother who was also married to another wife and the other brother passes away, so therefore the brother who had the original isur erva will be usher to marry the co-wife of the co-wife. So says Rabbi Yechanan to Reish Lakish, why didn't Levi count the 17th case? Because it's impossible to have this case with a co-wife of a co-wife. When could you have a co-wife of a co-wife? In the Mishnah, we spoke about Reuven marrying Shimon's daughter. If Reuven married Shimon's daughter from the brothers, who's the only one that cannot marry this woman? The father, Shimon. But all of the other brothers can marry their niece. So it's possible that she became a widow, and she married another brother, and she married another brother, no problem. So you can have a case of a co-wife of a co-wife. But if we're speaking about an isur here, of you're not allowed to marry your brother's wife, according to Reish Lakish, the isur of marrying your brother's wife is the isur with kares. If chalitza was done to all of the other brothers, so none of the other brothers can ever marry her. One brother is not different than the other. So there can never be a case where there's a co-wife of a co-wife. Not only is she an erva, but we learned in the previous sugya that the co-wife of an erva is also a lav sheyesh beikares. So kedushin is not chal. It's gavaldik. So since you don't have a case of a co-wife, that's why we didn't mention it. So the Gemara answers, why did Rabbi Yechanan have to answer Reish Lakish? She'eina b'tzara tzara, v'lei molei, you should have told him, chayovi lavani. Rabbi Yechanan holds, like we'll see in a moment, not like Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yechanan holds that the moment chalitza happened, even though now she is not allowed to marry any of the brothers, because it says in the Torah, Asher lo yivnes beis achiv, but that's a lav she'ein boy kares. And therefore, if one of the brothers did marry her, and the kedushin is chal, and now this new brother passes away, she will be connected to all of the other brothers. Even though there's an isur lav, there's no isur kares. And therefore, chayletzes, but chayletzes. So that's why it's not mentioned. So why didn't Rabbi Yechanan say that? And mido'ay raisa v'yibum. Answers the Gemara, lidvarav ka'amarlei. Rabbi Yechanan told Reish Lakish, according to you, lididi, according to my opinion, chayavi lavin heim, that a woman, a widow, who underwent chalitza, is not allowed to marry any of her deceased husband's brothers, only under the penalty of a lav without kares. However, and v'chayavi lavin mido'ay raisa have the option of both chalitza and yibum, mido'ay raisa. And then the Chachamim said that's what we learned before, right? That if there's an isur of lav, even though there's no kares, do chalitza. Why are you doing libum if you can do chalitza, but there's a chiyuv over here of yibum, and you resolve it through chalitza? But according to Reish Lakish, you hold chayav ikris is nino. And therefore, even according to you, I'll give you another answer. Even according to you, it's not mentioned because you cannot make, in such a case, a scenario where there's going to be the co-wife to a co-wife. And now the Gemara is going to talk through the case itself. Okay, so this is the end of the sugya of today's daf. Many brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, V'chuli. Reuven marries Miriam. Reuven dies childless. So there's a mitzvah on one of the brothers to do yibum or chalitza. So now, if one of the brothers chose chalitza, let's get this clear. The brother that did chalitza now is not allowed to marry her. But if he did, he himself is violating a lav that doesn't have the penalty of kadus. Therefore, his marriage is a halachic marriage. The question is regarding the other brothers. Machlokes Rabbi Avraham Zajac.
That would have married her after the chalitza was done. Is it kadus or just a lav?
Other brothers?
Yeah.
Machlokes Reish Lakish Rabbi Avraham.
Okay.
Rabbi Lakish holds yes. Reish Lakish holds that the original isur of your brother's wife stays to all of the other brothers, and Rabbi Avraham holds that being that there was a moment, like he was asking, when she was a widow, anyone could have done yibum or chalitza. If anyone could have done yibum and chalitza, what does that mean? That at that moment, the isur of your brother-in-law, your brother's wife, was suspended. So that doesn't come back. What comes back is another isur, asher lo yivne. Let's read it inside. Itma we learned, let's see if one of the brothers, one of the surviving brothers, does chalitza, right? Shimon does chalitza to Reuven's wife Miriam, who became a widow. And after he did chalitza, he did a sin. And b'chazar v'kitcha, now he married her. So the Shlakish says that who ein chayiv al hachalutza kadus, that this sin is a sin that doesn't have the penalty of kadus, which means that the marriage is a marriage. However, says Reish Lakish, ve'ha'achim, but any of the other brothers, chayavin ala chalutza kares, if they would have a relation with her, they're violating a lav sheyesh b'kares. In any scenario, either Shimon did chalitza and Levi married her. According to Reish Lakish, the marriage is not a marriage. Or even if Shimon did chalitza and Shimon married her, and then Shimon died childless. Weiter, Levi cannot marry her. Yehuda cannot marry her. Why? Because she is Eishes Ach. She's Reuven's wife. Period. That Isser never went away. And that Isser goes also al Hatzara. That's what we learn. Whenever one of the wives is Asr Mitzad Erva, that Isser goes on the Tzara. Bein hu, bein achim. And therefore, Chayovin al Hatzara Kares. Imagine. Yeah. So Reuven was married to Miriam and to another woman. Shimon did chalitza to one of the wives. If Levi is going to marry the other woman, chayiv kares. There's no marriage. Comes along Rabbi Yechanan and he says no. That bein hu, ubein ha'achim, both the one who did chalitza or any of his brothers, einon chayavin loy ala chalutza kares, v'loy ala tzara kares. When Reuven passed away and had Miriam and another wife, being that any of the brothers theoretically could have done yibum or chalitza to any of the wives, it's your brother's wife, and the response is that whenever one brother dies childless, there's a mitzvah of yibum. The mitzvah of yibum suspends, takes away the prohibition of you can't marry your brother's wife, and that prohibition never comes back. Now obviously again, if Shimon marries Miriam, which is Asad, and he has children, and then he dies, everyone holds that Levi cannot marry her because it's Shimon's wife. She's Eishes Ach of Shimon. That's something else. But if Shimon dies childless again, there's no Isur Eishes Ach. And what's the argument? So my Tama, the Reish Lakish, why does Reish Lakish hold that the Isur with Kares remains on all the other brothers? Because it says in the Pasuk regarding the man, the brother, who did Chalitza. So one of the statements that she tells him is that this is what is done to one asher lo yivne, to one who will not build. It's in the future sense as well. Who didn't build and who will not build. Kivin shalei bana shuv lo yivne. If you didn't do it, you're not allowed to do it. Now, whom did the Torah tell it to? Who does she tell it to? Who does she say, you see what happens? You didn't build it. And the chaylitz. Ihu the koyeb leivna. He, the one who did chalitza, he has only the lav of leivna. It's a lav that doesn't have the penalty of kares. Abalecha, but all of the other brothers, kaimi, it's as before. Oh. And va'allah didah, and only on the woman herself, the chalutza herself, is there only the lav of the loyivna. But her co-wife, upon whom not yibum nor chalitza was done, hatzara kedekaima kaimi. That is the opinion of Rish Lakish. Comes along Rabbi Yochanan and he says, mi ikemida. How can there be a case? The mi ikara, when Reuven passed away, then what was then the din? I boy hai chalitz. Which brother had the mitzvah of yibum v'chalitza? Any of them. This brother could have done chalitza. V'i boy hai, the other brother could have done chalitza. To which wife would you do it? To any wife. The Bach changes. In other words, there was a time that the prohibition that a man cannot marry his brother's wife with the penalty of kares doesn't exist. And and now kares will come back. And he says further, when the one brother does yibum or chalitza, he's not doing it as an individual, he's doing it mitzat shlichus, he's representing all his other brothers. Means if he marries her and he builds Beis Achiv, who's building Beis Achiv? Technically he is, but he's doing it on behalf of everyone. So whatever the law will be for him, being that he's just a representative of all the other brothers, that same din should be for all the other brothers. Because it could have been any of the other brothers. So it's like two reasons. First,
there's no cars for him, there should be no cars.
That's right. Ella, shlucha da'achim ka'avid. He represents all the brothers. Same thing is if there are more than one wife, being that each one could have been the chalutza or the yevama, each one represents the other. Ihi shlichusa detzaraka avda. She's representing her co-wife. And therefore they're all the same. Good. So that's the argument between Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Again, everyone agrees that the brother who did chalitza, the chaylitz himself, who's not allowed to marry her, is only going to be violating a new lav, she'ein ba kares, kedushin, it will be teifes, taking out the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. The machlekes is regarding all of the other brothers or the co-wife. Now comes along the Gemara and he says that Eis Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan is going to bring a braisa, and as we will see, and this happens quite often, that the braisa really has an internal contradiction. But from one part of the braisa, it's going to come out that Rabbi Yochanan is right. That Rabbi Yochanan is right, that no Isur Kares exists at all. What does it say in the Braisa? The Braisa speaks about our case. Right, there's Reuven and Shimon and Levi and who knows how many brothers? 12 brothers. And Reuven is married to Miriam. And Reuven passes away. Comes along Shimon as the representative, and Shimon does Chalitza to Miriam. And then V'chazar V'kitcha, and then Shimon, in violation of Hashem saying Lo Yivna, he marries Miriam. Everyone agrees the marriage, well, taking out Rabbi Akiva, is chal. And now Shimon dies. The question is, what does Levi do now? So that says in the Braisa, now according to Reish Lakish, what's the din? According to Reish Lakish, Levi is not allowed to marry Miriam because Miriam is Reuven's wife. Therefore, she's an erva, which has kares. That's the din of the Mishnah. No yibum nor chalitza is needed. But the Braisa doesn't say that. The Braisa clearly holds like Rabbi Yochanan. The Braisa says tzricha chalitza min ha'achim. That makes sense. Why does it make sense? Rabbi Yochanan holds that what? That none of the other brothers have the isur of kares. There is a lav, so of course yibum at the end of the day you can't do. God said don't do it. But since they theoretically could make kedushin, so the obligation of yibum is there, and you resolve it by making chalitza. So Bishlem Eledidi, it's obvious. Rabbi Yochanan talks it out. According to me, the Amina Chayav Elaven Nino, I hold that she's a Chayav Elaven only on all the other brothers. I know that Tzricha Chalitza Min Ha'achim. That's why the Braisa says Chalitza is needed. But Eledidach, according to you, Amai Tzricha Chalitza, why do you need Chalitza? A raya to me says Reish Lakish, let me tell you something, my friend. Read the next line in the Braisa. It's an internal contradiction. But the next part of the Braisa says something that only works if I'm right. So just like you're quoting the Reisha to refute my opinion, says Reish Lakish, yeah, Amos Seifa lo tameich. According to you, Rabbi Yechanan, Amos Seifa. It says, "Weiter, Amad echad v'no acham v'kitcha." Comes along Levi, and Levi goes ahead and Levi marries her. Now let's halt up. According to Rabbi Yechanan, is the marriage a marriage? Yeah. Can she marry another man? Not before she gets a get. The Braisa says, "Ein lo olav klum." There's no marriage. If there's no marriage, this Miriam now can marry any other man. She doesn't need a get. That proves that there was an Isur that has Kaddish. If you, Rabbi Yechanan, are right, ain't all of klum, she should be a married woman, married in sin. True. Like a Kohen who, God forbid, marries a divorced woman. Or like a person, God forbid, who marries a mamzeres. There are many prohibited marriages that are prohibited, but if it was done, they're married and they need a get. So Rav Sheshes attempts to answer that we have to say that the Sefer is going only according to the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that you mentioned before, that we learned a few daf ago. Rabbi Akiva is the only opinion that holds that whenever Hashem says that a certain union is prohibited, even if the union doesn't carry the penalty of Kaddish, that does not allow the Kedushin to be chal. The marriage doesn't go into effect. And that's why, even though it's only Chayav Lavin, which is why Chalitza is needed, but if Levi married her, ain't allow klum. Now obviously, if Rabbi Akiva would be the author of the entire Braisa, then the beginning doesn't make sense either. Because according to Rabbi Akiva, whenever there is a case of Yibum, and there's a prohibition, even if the prohibition doesn't carry the penalty of Kaddish, according to Rabbi Akiva, we also have the same din, no Yibum and no Chalitza. So the ratio of this Braisa has to be the Chachamim, and the Sefer has to be Rabbi Akiva. That this goes according to Rabbi Akiva, Da'amar Ein Kiddushin Toiv Semachayav Lavin, and that must be the answer, because you have an internal contradiction. So the Gemara counters, I don't like that answer. Because Vilitani Ladivri Rabbi Akiva Ein Lo Olav Klum. Why didn't the Mishnah write that according to Rabbi Akiva? So therefore, Daf Yud Aleph, Kasha, the way Rashi says. Kasha means that this Braisa has an internal contradiction. We don't accept fully the answer of Rav Sheshes. And if you have an internal contradiction, from one part it appears that Rabbi Yechanan is right. From the other part it appears that you cannot use it to refute either opinion. No, there has to be a mistake in the Braisa. And that's how Reish Lakish defended himself. Now, we're going to continue the Gemara tomorrow. I just want to bring up the following. I know that we mentioned this in the introduction to the tractate of Yevamos. There is a din of a Isha Katalanis. A Isha Katalanis means that it's called, by the Goyim, a black widow, I think. It means that if a woman is married, Reuven is married to Miriam, and Reuven dies.
Like you done to
Child is or not, exactly. And then Miriam marries her brother, Mitzvah Yibum, and the other brother dies. Or if it's not, let me take out the case what I just said, not two brothers. Miriam is married to husband number one, he dies. She marries husband number two and she dies. There's a machlekes Tanoim, Rebbe holds that no one should ever marry her. If she married a third husband and the third husband holds, then all of the opinion holds, don't marry her. Why not? She's called a Isha Katlanit. She's called a woman, a lethal woman. Now, don't forget that all of the cases that we're giving here, what are all the cases that we're learning? That she was married to Reuven and Reuven died, and then Shimon wrongfully, Chalitza married her, and then Shimon died. So the question is, do we apply the concept that it's a danger to marry a Isha Katlanis to Yibum? Why would we not apply it to Yibum? Because when it comes to doing a mitzvah, there's a concept of Shomer mitzvah, Lo Yeda Davara, or another concept, which is not the same, which is called Shluchei mitzvah, Einam Nizakin. In other words, well, it's not even a loisasa. Not marrying a Isha Katlanis is not a lav. And there was a big debate in Paiskim. There's a machlekes between the Noid Yehuda and the Chacham Tzvi, if we apply this concept or not. I just want to bring out that what we mentioned in the introduction, that according to the Zohar, the reason a man should not marry a Isha Katlanis is because when a man has a relation with a woman, always, the first relation she had with a man, she takes into herself the nefesh of that man. And it stays in her. And even if he dies, some of that man's spirit is in her. And the reason why if another man will marry her, the other man might die, is because not that she killed him. The first husband killed him. The nefesh of the, that's what it says in the Zohar. However, says the Zohar, whenever there's the mitzvah of yibum or chalitza, that nefesh finds rest, makes an aliyah. In other words, according to Kabbalah, there's no worry of Isha Katlanis. That's the whole law of Yibum, that's what we said. So just to put this in the mix, the Chassam Sofer speaks about that also.
Yibum, and then that guy dies again.
Something to do, then it's not because of her. It has nothing to do with her. That's no. I just want you to know that the Chassam Sofer in another case, in the bigger case of Yibum, says that there are certain inyanim that al pi Kabbalah should be done, but you don't always force Kabbalah into halacha, and that's a very interesting discussion that we will continue at another time.